in lieu of a guest tonight, Daniella and I are talking about the current state of affairs and how everything that's happening right before our eyes in the United States is reflective of everything that we talk about on this podcast. Welcome to Cults and the Culting of America podcast. I'm Scot Loyd, along with my friend and knitting cult lady, Daniella Mestyanek Young. Daniella, it's good to see you. It's been a minute since we've had the opportunity to get back together. I've been fighting some sickness, but feeling better, and it's nice to be back in the studio with you. How are you?
Yeah, doing good. Busy. Hell of a time to be an expert on the bad guy.
It
Uh,
is because there seems to be a lot of cultiness going around. Not only is there sickness going around, everybody seems to be struck with this cult bug. What's going on?
yes, and oh my gosh, I live in DC, so it is, it
Wow.
is kind of scary around here. We've got, neighbors putting their houses up for sale, people are losing their jobs, the sort of brain drains are starting from the government workers, and it is just very intense.
Which is very culty, right? When cult leaders they like to strip institutions that they take control of and replace the institutional knowledge with their own
Yeah.
cronies that will sort of be yes men to their desires. So it's not
Yeah,
surprising, I guess.
and this is very much a tactic of, cult leaders and tyrants, right? And just for the listeners, totalitarian nations is a type of cult. So,
Hmm.
talking about cult leader and tyrant is, we're not the first ones to do this. But it's like creating this climate of fear almost, right? Because nobody knows who's going to be next, what's going to happen. I mean, I've been answering questions about are we going to go into martial law like every day to people. And it's like, on the one hand, I'm like, that is so far fetched and impossible. And we can talk about that more. You know, but people are really afraid of what is happening. And all of this kind of apocalyptic reasoning and stuff in the air, is just culty.
And that's something that I have noticed on your content in particular, with Trump returning to the White House. Usually on your pages, I see you talking with and answering questions from people to the right of the political spectrum. But here of late, it seems like a lot of the hand wringing, so to speak, is coming from those on the left, and I suppose with good reason, right? I think
Yeah.
all of us that knew this was coming, we're not surprised. This is the same old Trump, except now, right? He's a little bit more experienced,
Yeah.
and seems to be, just from the outside looking in, a little bit more focused on what he wants to do.
Yeah. And he has a, trifecta of government, right? We've never had a majority conservative court, Republican president, and, House and Senate that I know of, um, you know, at, in quite a while. And so
Right, at least in the
he's being
modern
able
age.
to
Yeah.
push stuff. I think what you said is very true, that it's like we have seen this coming. This is what I keep saying. I just keep saying it's like it's my people running the government, right? And those of us that grew up in any form of Christian extremism, I think, and just extremism in general, I think really can recognize what's going on. And I mean, that's why we're here doing this stuff. We've just sort of watched as this has come along, and that's, I think, a thing that is on top of everything. I don't know how you feel, but like I feel really sort of triggered and angry a little bit that, like, seriously, like I spent so much of my life getting away from these people and then building my life and then healing, breaking and then healing, and and Now we got to do it again. Now we got to do it
Yeah.
in the nation.
Yeah, and that's been, my experience. I tell people, I felt like I did all of this in 2015, 2016, and then throughout the first Trump term, where I was waving my arms for anybody that would listen. And when he was elected now the second time, I sort of felt exhausted and despondent was my initial feelings. But now I'm sort of feeling like, okay, it's time to get back into engagement mode here. And the way that I'm approaching things this time around, um, instead of just responding to every little thing that comes out, because there's so much, right? And that's a tactic in and of itself. Um, I'm trying to hit on the big themes and the big ideas, because I told someone the other day, for the folks who are diehard cult supporters of the personality of cult Trump, there's no convincing them. We've talked about this several times, that you cannot reason with people. You cannot point out the flaws, because what will happen is they will double down on their position. So what I'm trying to do this second time around is focus more on the big themes. I have no illusions of convincing anyone or persuading anyone, but at the very least, whatever the outcome of this is, and Trump notoriously has been joking, even during the campaign. And again, it's hard to know when this man's joking or when he's just delusional about a possibility of a third term. And so, people kind of brush that off. But I have no doubt that he will leverage whatever means is necessary to endeavor to stay in the office that he's reclaimed once again.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, I feel like he must have been so shocked that he even was able to get back there in the first place, right? Like, obviously, after January 6th, we're all a
Yeah,
little shocked at what
absolutely.
happened. But like, he has nothing to lose, right?
Right.
First of all, he knows he's only got under 10 years left, right? At
Mm-hmm.
best,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so he knows he's got nothing to lose. Like, the worst thing that's going to happen to him is he's going to have to leave office after 4 years. And
Right.
he is just, to me, just at the heyday of the cult leader, like, he's just going to try to go for broke. He's going to try to be a dictator. I honestly think they're going a little too fast. This is what like you said, like,
Yeah.
if you live in the minutia of it, it's very exhausting. And that's not to say that all of it is not important and
Right.
affecting people's everyday life. Of course it is, right? But this is the one thing I said when he won the election. I was like, nobody can predict what's going to happen under a cult leader, but I promise he is going to be in the news every single day, right? Like, that is what he has shown us. And arguably that's what America wanted, like,
Yeah.
not happy with a quiet, sort of effective administrator. We want this out front, gregarious, charismatic, even though people argue with that term, you know, leader who's going to just be showing up every day and talking to the people.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is if the polling, the latest polling is any indication, that a lot of those people that were even enthusiastic for his second term are a little bit shocked and a little bit dismayed. I think that you're exactly right. They are moving a little bit too fast, because if you move fast, right, you're going to get whiplash, and that's what the entire country is getting now. And I was thinking today. Trump, during the election, to the run up to the election, was shouting almost daily, eggs, the price of eggs will come down on day one. Now he's shouting, get chickens, right? So it's amazing how that changes. But I was telling someone the other day, as we were discussing this, that I'm convinced, like you, that he has absolutely nothing to lose. And at this point, he famously said that he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and his followers wouldn't blink an eye. And I'm really convinced that he could do that now, knowing everything that we know in the lead up to this election. You mentioned it, January 6th. I'll never in my wildest imagination not understand how his inaction for, what was it, 187 minutes, saying and doing nothing except one tweet about Mike Pence, where he got the crowd even more riled up. And so even if you, let's backtrack to January 6th, even if you are a hardcore supporter and you say, well, he didn't incite the crowd, he was speaking figuratively when he was talking about fighting for the country, et cetera, et cetera. Even if you don't believe that, he said nothing and did nothing as they ransacked the Capitol building, and he was in a position that he could have stopped it. And so at the very least, that inaction,
he did stop it.
Yeah.
He did stop it eventually, right? He eventually
Right.
went on and was like, okay. And they were all like, all right, y'all, he called it off.
Yeah.
And
so that just demonstrates that, he lacks the character, he lacks the temperament, all of the things that we've said ad nauseum about this man, Trump.
Yeah. And I think, the point is, like, at this phase, right, he's been fully deified in the eyes of his cult, right? He is godlike. And this was said of Jim Jones, right? Because Jim Jones took Christianity, right? He became a Christian minister, and then he created a Christian multiracial church. And then ultimately, he took them away from Christianity. And ultimately, he repudiated Christianity, and he was like, I'm just the thing now. And by that point, right, they didn't need a god anymore because he had become their god. And I also think this is, there's this concept here called the deification of idiosyncrasy, which is our human, innate desire to make excuses for the inexcusable behavior of our charismatic leaders. And in Uncultured, which, by the way, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can get signed copies here now.
Yay.
So in Uncultured, I say the first rule of cults is you're never in a cult. And then second rule of cults, I was watching Harry and Meghan saga, and it's the cult will forgive any sin except the sin of leaving, right? We're always the backsliders. But then the third rule of cults, even if he did it, doesn't mean he's guilty. Right. And this for me is the deification of idiosyncrasy. This is Trump saying he can shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and they won't care. Right. Even if he did it, doesn't mean he's guilty. And it doesn't change what we think about him. We're going to continue loving him. And, kind of across the board, when cult leaders are convicted and sent to jail, their followers do not leave them. Right. Like, some of them wake up, but for the most part, like, what we see is no, people can justify any action when they're in this phase, like where they've been completely culted. 10 out of 10 steps.
Absolutely. And if you don't know what those 10 steps are, go back and listen to our initial episodes on this podcast. Oh, and by the way, if you haven't noticed already, in lieu of a guest tonight, Daniella and I are talking about the current state of affairs and how everything that's happening right before our eyes in the United States is reflective of everything that we talk about on this podcast. So I think even those that support him, although they would not use the word cult, I think they would talk about use terms like even Trump himself has talked in terms of, this is a movement, right? This is the greatest movement that anyone has ever seen. And, he uses hyperbole and speaks in those grandiose terms, which is another sign.
Language of revolution, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The language, this is very important, like the language of persecution and the language of revolution. And you know what? I need to add that to the chapter on cult language, by the way. I just realized, right? Like, this is what we had, right? In the Children of God, right? We literally, this is one of our call and responses. You know, an adult would walk, or a leader would walk into the room and yell, "It's a revolution!" And then we'd all throw up 3 fingers like Hunger Games Mockingjay style and be like, "For Jesus!"
Yeah.
You know,
Wow.
and we have this
Yep.
army imagery, right? And you had this growing up, I
Mm-hmm.
believe, right? With
Yeah.
Army of God. Um, which, by the way, brings me to another interesting topic, because of course I'm the lady that compares the army to a cult. And one of the things I think people are not realizing is that, like, these two cults are not the same thing. So this is a lot of the explaining I've been doing recently too, is, you know, people being like, "Well, you said the army was a cult, but then you're saying you don't think that they'll just like obey Donald Trump." And so my quick explanation is, we know that cults can be led by a person or by an idea. Right? We don't talk about the idea cults that much. But that's even what I think some of these big ones, like Mormons, are,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, they're actually led by the idea that they're the one true church. And then the leadership is just kind of passed down. But there can be this almost like charismatic idea leading the cult. That's not what we have with MAGA, right? Like, that is a cult of personality, fully started before they had Donald Trump, but it
Yeah.
became like fully formed around Trump. But the military is a cult led by an idea. And that idea is the American Constitution, right? And like, as much as I criticize the military, and I will continue to, for being a cult, for being harmful to individuals, and you know, there's this whole conversation we don't want to have as a nation with, like, we know it's a cult, we just ask 1% of individuals to kind of like sacrifice themselves for us. But you know, 90% of the people serving in our military are not going to just capitulate their value system, I think, and obey illegal orders, immoral orders, this kind of stuff that people are afraid of.
Right.
Um, and one of the interesting things that I think is that Donald Trump actually doesn't understand how our military works, because he studies dictators' militaries and
Yeah.
top-down militaries. And he wants it, right? He wants it all. But I think we have we're going to see like some clashing of the cults here.
Yeah, and I think you are in a great position to speak to this because obviously a captain in the army, an intelligence officer, also among the first women to see actual combat in your particular field, and so when you speak to things like this, and I always have to remind people because they don't listen. You know, listening is a lost art. So it's very easy for you to become a punching bag metaphorically because they stop listening when you say the military is a cult and they forget all of your experience, the fact that you served honorably,
Mm-hmm.
you received a medal from the president of the United States. So that's all important. And you can recognize both ideas being true
Yeah.
at the same time. That it
And
that
it,
it is honorable to serve, and at the same time they're using cult like or cult ways of doing things to mess people up.
yeah. And, you know, it is funny because these two things have been coming together recently, you know, and it's like people be like, "Oh, well, you don't know. You were, you know, a captain in the army doesn't know." And I'm like, "Well, nobody knows. Like, that's why we're all here listening to a cult scholar about national security, right? Like, this is not the way it was supposed to be happening. Like, I thought I was going to spend this year analyzing how close we came to having MAGA as our government, and, you know, here we are instead."
Yeah, and it's interesting to me. There's a lot of chatter, and there always is surrounding Trump, and even from the left as well, or from the right as well, depending on who the president is. Um, there's a I don't want to say a law, but sort of an axiom, a truth, if you will, that when people run out of things to say, immediately they start comparing a leader or a administration to Hitler or to the Nazis, right? Because that's the worst example that we have in our minds. So immediately we go there. I try to avoid that when I talk about these things for several reasons. But first of all, I think that I agree that Hitler and Nazism, it's horrible, horrible, horrible. But that being said, if we start pointing fingers and identifying Trump as another Hitler, things of that nature, we might do a disservice to that history that actually
Yeah.
happened.
Yeah.
But that being said, just because he's not that evil doesn't mean that we shouldn't speak up and speak out
Yeah.
against whatever this evil happens to be.
Well, and I also think, when you compare it that directly to something, it's almost like it's like calling something a cult. Everyone stops listening, right?
Yeah.
As soon as you say it's a cult, everyone stops listening. This is why I spend a lot of time on my channel talking about, well, these are the tactics, these are the things that we can recognize, and so it's like, well, if we I really like this quote that says, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so it's like we need to be looking at like what are the tactics? What are the things across the board? Right? Like it actually doesn't matter if he's more like this guy or that guy or whatever. Like they all use the same tactics, right? They all deal with making you distrust the media, right? Making facts questionable, right? Then creating a state of fear. These are the kinds of steps that we can see when we can like pull back. And this is one of the reasons I say, like, it doesn't hurt anyone to be compared to a cult leader ever, right? Because like if the pattern is there, it's relevant. And if it's
Yeah.
not, then you look great. And we'll be like, oh, okay, I guess you're not a cult leader, but if
Right.
it quacks like a cult, right? But it is I think it's just really important, and we even saw this in, Afghanistan. Believe what you want about us over there, we're all deconstructing that too, but at some point we were like, it actually doesn't really matter trying to tell all the different groups apart and all the different things. Like if we're tracking the tactics, like this is how we're going to be able to predict like what is happening and what we're dealing with. And this
I want
is,
to,
I think,
yeah.
my strategy with looking at cults and groups and leaders of any kind. If we don't have to call you a cult leader, but if you're doing cult leader guy stuff, then I'm going to look at you with a bombastic side eye.
There you go. I want to return to your military service and experience for just a moment because the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. So apparently he wrote a book, and that's how he got on the radar of a lot of people about returning the quote unquote the warrior mentality to the armed forces. And I remember back when I was a young red blooded Republican waving that flag, I would listen religiously to people like Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity on these right wing commentators. And I remember famously that Rush Limbaugh always said, the military exists to kill things, to kill people, and to break things. Because he was all upset because I think George H.W. Bush at some point had the military delivering meals in Somalia or something like that. And so he was upset that he used to lampoon the military during that time as a Meals on Wheels program. And he was like, the military exists to kill people and to break things. That's what, and Pete Hegseth seems to be honoring that legacy because, he said that diversity is not a good thing for the military. And I don't know how you bypass all of the science on this, how important diversity is. I mean, even in sports teams, if you had one player that was only good at making jump shots, but nobody could make a layup or nobody could score from the 3-point line or nobody could play defense, you're not going to have much of a team. But
Yeah.
it seems like that's what Pete
And
wants for the military.
and the funny thing is like they know that on a team, but as long as it's like the things that they think that they want, right? And I mean, the problem is this has been such a closed system for such a long time, right? So this, warrior mentality, like I served with all of these guys, right? It's just toxic masculinity.
Yeah, I
What
was going
you
to
said,
ask.
right?
Yeah,
Like we would have
how many?
colonels or
Yeah.
old grumpy helicopter pilots that would walk in, they'd be like, "Stop smiling. We're not in the business of hearts and butterflies. We're in the business of killing people." And like,
Hmm.
you know what? The intelligence I delivered was just fine with a smile on my face.
Yeah, I
Literally
was going
that
to ask how
photo,
many.
there's this photo of me, right? I'm all kitted up. I'm out on the sand. I'm literally making history as one of the first women on an Army deliberate ground combat team. And I am smiling in this photo. And men hate it. Like these military men, they just hate it. And but anyway,
Yeah, I was going to ask you
like
how
we
many.
thought we were working against this, right? But I think that this is also just like very obviously the swing, right? So like how they can think this, how they can ignore the science, right? Is the same way that Christians ignore evolution, right?
Mhm.
They just tell themselves over and over again, they have apologetics, they have all of that stuff, right? One of the first things I did at my my graduate degree at Harvard was I wrote a paper called Nice Girls Don't Join the Army, and I systematically just like debunked all of their reasons. And like the combat ban was already overturned. I had been a little part of that, but I was like, I need to prove it. I'm gonna prove it to me. I'm gonna prove it to y'all. Um and I think it's almost funny how they're trying to like how they think they can yank it backwards.
Yeah,
Like so when I heard that like the Pentagon is being ordered to get rid of the photos of the Enola Gay because it's called gay, like I just was like hysterically laughing,
yeah,
right? Because this is kind of how pathetic they are, right? Thinking that like you can destroy a record of the Enola Gay existing in the information age,
yeah,
right? Like as a former government trained information scientist, this is one thing I can give you for free. Once information is unsecured, right? Once you have lost security on that information, you cannot get it back. And when that security is on the internet, like it is never coming back. So like I- like it's so silly. It's ridiculous that this is the president and this is the secretary of state and this is like so it is serious, but it is also just so silly to me. Like this is just
yeah. I was going to ask you. Yeah,
patriarchy's like dying gasps.
how many of the men that you served with remind you, was that mentality pretty prevalent? Does Pete Hegseth, does he embody what a lot of the issues with the patriarchy that you faced in the military? Did it sound like him? Did it look like him?
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah. Okay.
he is just the vet bro that we all hated. Like he was that guy that would come debate me about how women couldn't be in the military even though I could run a mile 2 minutes faster than him, right? Like he is that guy that would also, even the ones that weren't like as toxic out loud, they would be like, "Oh, but like you're not really a woman, right? Like
Mm,
you can do this, but like the other ones can't." And it was just like I don't know, even the well-meaning men, I think there's just so much misogyny in that culture. Even the women
sure.
couldn't, right? Even I couldn't avoid it, right? Like I was very much the pick me uh woman and officer. But it's just, I just keep coming back to like first of all, nobody's this afraid when they're winning. And this is what makes me say, like, they're going so fast, right? They're going so fast. They're going to boil the water too fast. The frogs are all going to jump out. Like, they, because he wants it so bad, because he wants to be the cult leader, he wants a dynasty, right? Like, he's going to try to push. It takes decades to do what he's
Right.
trying to do, right? Like in countries that have gone from democracy to dictatorships, it takes decades. Even in Germany. It took many, many years before, all of the stuff, and completely different countries, completely different types of populations, right? Somebody asked me, "Oh, do you think they're going to come for our weapons?" And I was like, even if we all were already in line right now, ready to give in our weapons, it would take longer than 4 years to collect all of the weapons in America.
Yep.
Like this stuff that they're trying to do, right? Like, it is horrible. They are following the maps of tyrants. I've said from the beginning, like Donald Trump is incredibly dangerous. He wants to be the end of America. I think it's really significant that there was a 4-year gap in there. If he had had undisturbed time, I think I was worried in 2020 that we wouldn't have been looking at free elections again. And I do think, speaking of clash of the cults, right? We saw the Supreme Court turn him down on one thing, and it was a little thing, but very significantly, Amy Coney Barrett voted against him. And so now, of course, MAGA is trashing her, and she's the DEI hire.
Yeah.
But these are the little things, and I think this is part of when we're telling people, like, don't panic, right? It was 6 weeks, and we had a Supreme Court decision saying no, right? Like, that's about as fast as we can expect the wheels of our government to turn. But this is, again, from cult stuff, like, this is going to be the saving grace, I think, is that, like, look, America's a cult, but we are very routinized, right? We have 248 years of people writing down laws and bureaucrats making rules and doing things, and that takes a long time to undo. So even one of the things that was like, the Secretary of Defense told Donald Trump that he would kill for him. And it's like, or not Secretary of Defense, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, right? Like, that's frightening, but also that's not the guy that's doing the killing.
Right.
The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is not killing people, right? Like, Donald Trump is not the one not paying U.S. aid, right? So people are like, what if he doesn't comply with the Supreme Court? Well, he's not the one that does it, right? There's these people whose jobs are in the way. And I
Right. And
think,
as of today, he's not a king. The United States, we don't have a monarchy. I think where we need to be concerned, and rightfully so, is what he is doing to the office of the presidency. So he is certainly expanding those particular powers. Now, we can go back and we can look at George W. Bush. There was a lot of executive orders. And since that time, there seems to be a widening and an expansion of the presidential powers. But make no mistake, no one is doing what Donald Trump has done, because for the 200 and almost 50 years of our existence as a nation, given all of our systemic problems, all of our issues, the one thing that we did have going for us is that we all sort of agreed on what government should look like, right? And that we respect one another. And even though we may disagree on fundamental issues, we still see other people as Americans, just with a different approach to solving problems. I think that that's eroding and that is disappearing. And so my concern is not necessarily for the Trump presidency, but what comes next and what does that look like? Even if my side happens to win, they're now put in a position, right, where they have to use executive orders to undo all of these
and
executive orders,
right,
and it's just
exactly.
a
And
cycle.
and and this is the problem with, like, pendulum swing politics, right? This is the problem with a two-party system, right? It's like, yeah, so say we have a good midterm and we get some stuff back, and then we take it back in 2028, and then what? Now that president's a king, and that
Yeah,
president is not a king, obviously, right? But, like,
right.
is immune, as the Supreme Court has ruled, right?
Yeah,
Expansion of presidential powers. And I think the one thing we've always had before, as you were saying, is like the president respected the Constitution, and this one doesn't. This
Yes.
one wants to destroy it, and that's like, I do not think we're being too harsh when we're saying cult leader. I finally got my answer for people saying both sides are equally as culty, because I'm like, yeah, look, by definition, two-party system is culty, and like black and white, and defining yourself as not the other person. But I was not selling 200 cult books a day when
Right.
Democrats were in office. Like, there's some scary stuff going on right now, but I agree with you. And we, at a veteran program I was in a few years ago, we had an opportunity to talk with Adam Smith, a senator from Washington, and he was saying, like, you cannot, it's not even, you can't be moderate and win. You can't be even reasonably truthful and win. You have to promise the moon. You have to promise everything. I even remember in the '08 Obama election, I was a kid in college in Germany, ironically, thinking like, oh, it's too hopeful, right? There's too much like, yay, racism's over, right? Like,
Yeah.
everything's good. Like, we're going to go down. You're only going to be able to disappoint people.
Yeah, and in retrospect, President Obama, right, was he was pretty even killed. He was accused of being everything that Trump is by their side, right?
Yep.
When he spoke in generalities. I remember Obama talking about fundamentally transforming the nation, and people on the right lost their mind. Well, we are witnessing right now a fundamental transformation of our nation, at least as government is concerned. And there will be a price to pay. I mean, there's always a backlash there in history. There is always a resistance. There is always a pendulum swing. There is always a correcting that happens. And so, my concern is that one day that's going to swing too far. And it happens obviously in other countries around the world. It's happened in the history of the world over and over again. And I always reminded people, and I tried to remind them, that relatively speaking, historically speaking, we are a very young nation. The Roman Empire, over 1,000 years, right? We're next year we celebrate our 250th birthday. In the scope of history, that is very, very small, and certainly too small for us to think of ourselves, as many on the right do, as this exceptional nation, right? That God has chosen us. Well, let's wait and see. We're only 250 years old, right? And have a lot of problems to show for it.
Yeah, I mean, I literally was in Germany, 21 years old, studying governance and empire, and this triangle of empire where they say it's right at about 250 years, in fact, where like an empire extends itself too much and then needs to sustain itself, and then can no longer sustain itself and rule and expand. Someone else that's not having to do that comes up. And I remember thinking, like, between that and between studying systems of governance, and thinking, oh, wow, like, it's kind of conceited of us as Americans to think that, like, one, democracy is the end all be all, and that two, like, we're going to be on top forever.
Yeah,
And this is one thing that I do think he's really going to affect, is our standing in the world.
it's
And,
already
I mean,
happening.
people are not going to take us seriously, for better or for worse, for a while, in and not like, when I say take us seriously, I mean like our security partners, our intelligence
Right.
sharing partners, our people that let us travel in their nations. I mean, just
And by the way, I think we need to point this out, right? That U.S. aid to other countries now, being gutted, and very little of it, if anything, being left. It opens the doors for our very real enemies in the world to step in and to provide the aid that we
yeah,
were
yeah.
providing. And it creates allies, it creates support. And withdrawing all of that, just, with the stroke of a pen, without any reasonable study or negotiation or talks or anything, it puts us, behind the eight ball with all of these countries that were dependent upon us for help. Now we create more enemies and fewer allies, and we open the door for our most concerning enemies, China among them, to walk into those countries and to provide them with what they need, thus securing another ally for their cause.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a reason, people's whole lives are spent studying minute factions and parts of the world and, this kind of stuff. And people roll in thinking, I don't know, it's just the brashness of like the business cult and the tech cult to me, like together here and being like, move fast and break things. And like, well, you're breaking it. And, we're gonna find out, right? Like
Yeah,
lot
and
of lot of red states are gonna be hurting when, Canada cuts off the power.
and that's a very real concern, and the fact that we have an administration right now that is not elevating expertise or even experience. They are elevating what one man likes in another individual, and regardless of experience, regardless of qualification, giving them positions of power where they can fundamentally change things, and not necessarily for the good. And there's going to be long term ramifications of that. So maybe in the few minutes that we have remaining, if you could talk a bit about some of the work that you've been doing. I know, tuning into your channel, you've been doing a lot of this where you're talking to people about attempting to allay their fears a bit because of what's happening. And then also, as someone who understands cults, as someone who has served in the military, um, what is your best advice for us going forward? How do we deal with this? How do we weather the storm, so to speak, when it comes to this second Trump administration? That's a lot, I know.
Yeah, I mean, one thing is, I think, like understanding that apocalyptic thinking like plays in their favor. Right? Like when we think the world is going to end, we sit down and hug our families. We don't go out and fight. Right? And I keep hearing things like, oh, people just say like, oh, he's going to pardon Derek Chauvin, and then we can't protest because then they're going to declare martial law. And it's like, you're conceding in advance.
Right.
Like we can see that none of those things are probably true, or if they are, like, we'll respond then, right? But saying that like we can't do this, we can't, like, really really what I want people to remember is that like we the people are 340 million people. Like America, it's very difficult to rule any country by force. But a country the size of America, with the terrain as vast as America, and the people of America who are not rule followers in personality, like it would be very, very difficult, So, couple
Yeah,
of
just
suggestions.
look at the pandemic, right? Look at how many people pushed back
Exactly.
against mask
Exactly.
wearing,
Yeah.
against
Yeah.
vaccines, et cetera, et cetera. And
And
that was done in the most, forgive the term, it seemed to be the most loving, sympathetic way. Hey, our best science says this will mitigate it, right? And we really, they talked about these mandates all the time. All I ever saw was people saying, we strongly suggest that you do this. Please don't come into our business. It was please and thank you. And people were losing their minds.
yeah. Yeah. And so this is kind of what I say to people, So for example, one woman was like, I'm very worried that like they're gonna start mandating haircuts, right? For like short hair for boys and long hair for women. And because cults have done this and because North
Yeah.
Korea does this. And I just say just try to picture, so on the one hand, try to picture the logistics of that. Like, what would that look like? The logistics of trying to mandate 340 million very diverse people's haircuts, right? So, like, maybe you can lower your anxiety from just thinking through that, right? Or thinking through the logistics of 2 million soldiers trying to control 340 million Americans, you know? One of the AMA for today was about, like, what do I think about RFK and his labor camps and stuff? And I've been saying a couple things about this, which is one, I grew up in and survived labor camps. RFK could not take me on, but just think of the logistics of putting 10% of Americans in camps. And then also just think of the shenanigans that late diagnosed autistic women would run in RFK's labor camps. Like,
Yeah.
all the things we know how to do, all the
Right.
ways we would push back. So this is kind of the other thing, right? So in threat assessments and intelligence, we always do your most likely and your most dangerous, right? So you want to be looking at what's actually going on in the world. What's the most likely? What's happening that's affecting me this week, right now, my neighbors, going out, touching the ground, right? Doing parts of the American life that you can still do, living in the most likely. And if you have to go into the most dangerous, okay, what are you afraid of? And then ask yourself, what would you do? Right? So if they said haircuts are mandated, kids can't be enrolled in school without, are you going to fight back? Are you going to capitulate? Are you going to fight back? What does that look like? Does that look like a lawsuit? Who are your partners for this, right? Like that's what planning is for, and people keep saying to me, like, well, now this has happened, so now should we panic? And I'm like, no, even if we're in the labor camps, where panic is not helpful, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Panic solves nothing.
panic solves nothing. It's part of human ways that human beings get themselves through trauma is by telling themselves it's not so bad, you can keep going, right? Like one leg off, pulling yourself out of
Right.
a burning rubble, telling yourself it's fine, and you can keep going. And so, like, yeah, it's, what I say is, the short answer at the end of the day is, when you're in a cult that you cannot leave, which often we are, right? We're children or teenagers or in a country like this, and what you do is you survive and you resist. And resisting in the ways that you can are very important. Part
Yeah.
of how I
Part of that resisting is doing what we're doing tonight. We're talking about this. We're looking at as realistically as we can. And again, just to go back to how I felt, just a few months ago, rather despondent and not really wanting to be engaged. And I am noticing about myself that I'm reading headlines, and if something catches my attention, but I've basically this go around I've turned the news off, because I think in a very real way, Trump has transformed what we see and what we hear as far as news is concerned. Even the legacy news agencies are covering him differently this go around than they did the last time. So what I'm trying to do, just for my own peace of mind, I'm not checking out, but I am sort of disciplining myself as to what I consume, what I see, what I hear, and then what I do about it. And so I, talking here, clicktivism, right, on social media channels. I tell people all the time when they say, thank you for doing that. Well, again, it doesn't seem like much, but it is something. And it is for the record, and it is there, right?
Yeah,
Provided that
right.
social media and the internet doesn't go away in the future. What you say and what you do, you are a witness, and you are a voice that stands against this. And maybe in the
Yeah,
future, someone will need that voice.
and the fact that we're here saying it is part of the resistance, right? Part of
Yes.
what makes America so ungovernable is we have so many goddamn podcasts that we can get together on. And,
Yep.
like, again, imagine them trying. We do have the best spy network in the world, but imagine them trying to monitor all of us,
Right.
right? Like, imagine, like, they couldn't, a plague couldn't keep us in our houses.
Yeah.
So I think that going through hard times together is what bonds people. I some of us have lived through some of these things that, everybody is really afraid of, and it's sucky and it is hard, and we need to be in community right now. I keep telling people, like, get to know your neighbors, figure out who knows what special skill. One of the things, because the internet, it was, people don't really have books on like how to do things anymore, right? So like, who knows how to do what in your neighborhood? Pay attention to like the kids who grew up in religious extremism and the veterans, because we have all kinds of weird
Right.
skills. Like, uh figure out what things you can do. I'm going to a protest in DC this Friday, marching with the Sons of Liberty, and I am loving it. See you there if you're around. Oh, this will come out after that, but oh well. But like, another thing I've done recently, so I have chosen one of my institutions to care about is the post office, and I watch it closely, and it's, very connected to freedom. It's in our Constitution, and it has been dying. And so one of the things, because I've been selling so many books, and my post office told me that I was like, they were justifying extra hours for people because of the books. And so
Wow.
I turned off FedEx and UPS. Like, nope, I'm the gangster here, so I'm going to force you to use USPS to buy my stuff. And these are the decisions we can make. Like, it's shocking to me how much people were paying for other stuff. So maybe I'll lose some business because people really hate USPS. But like, this is my little thing that I can do right now to resist.
And I
So,
love it. Yeah. And
yeah.
and that's what it's all about. So sort of just uh very rarely do you and I have the opportunity just to make small talk, and so to end this episode in sort of more of a lighter fashion, I have often thought, Daniella, that you would be awesome on pick your celebrity or pick your reality television show, especially if it's like a survival type thing. I think you would be outstanding. And I think all of your listeners and all of us who are enthusiastic about what you do should encourage you to do this and represent all of us, because you got the skill set, you've got the intelligence officer experience. You know how to read people. I mean, come on. That $1 million prize is
Oh,
it's got your
I
name on it,
know. I
Daniela.
feel a little, it just sounds tiring to me. This is how I know I'm middle aged, right? Because I'm like, oh, it just sounds so tiring. But let me tell you what I do. Now I have to have 1 million TikTok accounts. So I have a backup now called Knitting Cult Ladies Closet. And it is only knitting content and how to and knitting related content, which is, of course, also politics and revolution. But no
I love it.
cults, just, just knitting content. I have also made a culty knitting patterns book, which you can get here. Digital copy. It's got some fun stories about how I come up with my different patterns, and then some very easy knitting patterns. You do already need to know how to knit, but there you go. We're making different things. Um, Hobbies. This is the last thing I'm going to say to people, is like, hobbies and art, like, in times of oppression, we need them more, not less. We need to make more art and do more things. And so Quilting of America is going to launch with custom knitting needles that look like swords, and we're going to, we're going to be doing all the hobbies.
I love it. I love it. But any aspiring producers out there, this is your gal right here. I mean, come on. She has the
I would be
experience.
great on TV. I would be great on TV. And let me tell you, one celebrity that I want, if I could choose anyone to have lunch with,
Mm-hmm.
it's Trevor Noah,
Okay.
because everything he says about language is just so brilliant, and he's so brilliant
Absolutely.
and amazing. But also, he thinks he can eat a chicken down to the carcass the most, and I will take that bet. I will take that.
Well, you heard it here, Trevor Noah. So the gauntlet has been thrown down, or in this case, the chicken, and we want to see who can clean that carcass the quickest. So yeah, give us a ring if you know Trevor Noah, or if you're him. Yeah, absolutely. We will take that call. Hey, this has been a delight, Daniella, and it's good to get back into the swing of things. And as always, we're very appreciative of our listeners. And if you like the podcast, subscribe, share with a friend, leave us a note, leave us a rating. That helps the algorithm get the word out. And of course, as always, follow the Knitting Cult Lady on all of the social media channels, and get her book, Uncultured. It's a great way. It's a great way to
Signed
conclude the
copies here
program.
now.
Yeah,
Signed
I love
copies
it.
here.
And supporting the United States Postal Service. So what could be better?
Good night, everybody.
I love it. Until next time, I'm Scott Loyd for Daniella Mestyanek Young. We'll see you on the next episode of Cults and the Culting of America.